Name me a single policy outside of getting rid of the non-dom exception, for example, is anywhere other than the top right quadrant. Name me one policy. In the tradition of leftist infighting, we're going to be responding to this, a different bias video, trying to defend the Labour Party from being centrist and right-wing and neoliberal yet again, because that is his want to do so, because that's the same political opinions that he has, no matter how socialist he claims to be in his Twitter bio. So we're going to watch this and respond. Maybe he has good takes. I'm not going to tempt fate here by saying that I fundamentally oppose the things that he's saying, because I'm not watching the video. It's going to be a first-time reaction. But let's respond. I don't have high hopes based on the last stuff that we watched.
Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and as we seem to have in another one of those weeks where Labour are annoying a few anti-Tories, I thought I'd try and explain in nice, easy to understand terms why this is necessary, with hopefully a useful graphic to illustrate the points. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I've done,
which you can do actually on my channel instead. Take his advice, but don't apply it to his channel. Apply it to my channel. Like and comment and subscribe to my channel, please. Instead, future YouTube viewers and or current stream viewers. I'm currently live. If you want to do that, please do as well.
I've done this a few times for individual cases, explaining why, well, certain parties, but mostly Labour, are adopting them or seeming to adopt certain positions. You know, why they use certain phrases. But I think what might help is a general overview of election strategy. Not going to discuss any individual statement or policy, but how all of them can make sense if you consider the importance of, you know, where different voters are on the political compass. So let's begin by grouping voters into 4 quadrants.
Okay, right, we're already on Polcom. It's bunk politics, the Polcom. But whatever, we'll engage with it.
On that compass. So there's left and right, of course. This is the economic axis. Those on the left place an emphasis on the state controlling the means of supply and production, particularly of very important services.
No, socialism is where the government does stuff. He did say generally. So, you know, okay, I'll cut him some slack there. Maybe it's just me and my audience, but I mostly would say that my purview on control should be worker control, but based upon, you know, worker cooperatives rather than state control, should be based upon, you know, the kind of market feedback that you get from that particular sector of the economy, right? If it's a sector of the economy with poor market feedback, decommodify, put it in the hands of the state. If it's something with great market feedback, put it in the hands of the workers and democratize it, as far as I'm concerned. If you're saying generally left-wing economic people want the state to control more means of supply and production, then he's technically correct in that it's a general thing, but the idea that is fundamentally a left thing, or the fundamental things that people on the left should want to, I disagree with. But.
With the extreme left being communism, of course, where there is no free enterprise at all. The state controls the means of all.
Please don't Google anarcho-communism, Phil. Or just communism, being a classless, stateless, moneyless society. If the state controls everything, that's just state capitalism. Unless you have abolished the commodity form. I can't believe I'm having to say this every single time.
Production and supply. The right wing has an emphasis on the private sector producing and supplying, with the extreme right wing being free market capitalism, where the only thing the state provides is a military to stop people invading us and a police force to keep the population in line. There is then the social axis, with liberal leanings below, authoritarian ones above.
I'm not going to massively critique this because I think that it's not like correct in totality, but as a general rule, it's close enough. I mean, if you have to pick, I would prefer state control to free market control. Exactly the same, yeah, 100%. You can have a socialist market economy, for example, where you have the Schweikart model, which is essentially a free market of worker or consumer cooperatives, which I think is good. I mean, you look at Tito's Yugoslavia, where it was a market economy where the production was delegated through workers' councils rather than, you know, de facto state control of everything. The fundamental principle, though, was a socialist market economy. Not like China says that they are, but what you actually have in Yugoslavia is worker control of commodity production.
Now, these quadrants are not evenly distributed with voters, But publicly available data on how each one is populated is not always easy to come by. Polls would indicate that the bottom left quadrant is the most densely populated, but not overwhelmingly so. Also, when it comes to election strategy, what the majority of people think is irrelevant. Not every person votes, so they don't express their view at all. Of those who do vote, not every voter lives in a constituency that has a reasonable chance of changing hands. Where a voter does live in a constituency that has a reasonable chance of changing.
But the problem is that if you take this point of view, right, well, he's essentially trying to lay the groundwork is a point of view of saying that, well, actually, if you look at electoral maths, the only people Labour have to pander to should specifically be swing voters, and they should ignore every constituency where there's not a potential chance of them winning. First of all, they're 20 points ahead in the polls, right? Every constituency is in play at this point in time. And even then, right, the way that party politics can shift means that even seats where you don't think you have any point of actually contesting can flip. Look at Canterbury in 2017, for example, right? Look at the electoral shift in 2017 regardless, where huge amounts of polling shift was done to the Labour Party out of basically nowhere, for example. And that was off the back of new voters wanting to come, being inspired by a message of change, for example, but also, full-throated support of honouring the Brexit referendum, but in a way that is beneficial to working people, moved people over from other pro-Brexit positions to the Labour Party at that point in time as well. Look at Chesham and Amersham a year ago. Well, it's a by-election, but I know exactly what you mean, right? There can be gigantic, monumental shifts in the way people polling, right, for example. And there's also this idea that swing voters between the Conservatives that were from Tory to Labour are the only ones that matter, whereas the Labour Party are at serious risk at this point of pushing the left so far away that they all move to the Greens, for example, right? They're not being attacked from just one singular axis here with regards to swing voters. I mean, fair play to Phil, Kevin, right? Phil is support of proportional representation, as far as I'm aware. And if he is, him explaining that on first past the post is bad when he doesn't support it makes sense. I'm not going to critique him for that.
Hands. They don't necessarily use their votes to influence the outcome. They may vote for someone who has zero chance of winning, for example.
We've also got to understand, right, is that there are some policies on here that just don't even fit this particular graphic, or some that can be looked at from loads of different perspectives, but depending on what it is, right? In the same way that a leftist who doesn't want immigration because they think erroneously, for example, by increasing the supply of labour, that will therefore devalue their own bargaining position as a member of the proletariat. That's a fundamentally different position for someone who opposes immigration because they want brown people in the country. They both be placed on this quadrant in the wrong place, right? Maybe they're both viewpoints that are specific to right-wing authoritarians or left-wing authoritarians, for example. But on the specific policy of immigration, you can't say, well, being anti-immigration is a right-wing or left-wing perspective, or a liberal perspective, for example, or a non-liberal or conservative perspective, because it doesn't fit on this weird mishmash of trying to, pigeonhole specific political ideologies.
So we're going to look at this empirically to an extent. So if you were deciding Labour's strategy for the election, if you think about it from the point of view of we need to work out a strategy to allow Labour to win the election, and you wanted to compile policies to win that election, what are you faced with? Well, the first thing to note is that Labour sits most happily in the bottom left and the Conservatives in the top right. But
okay, obviously I have some concerns with this placing here, but I again, I'm going to give Phil the benefit of the doubt with this one and say that he's placing these here based upon either people's perception, the member base of the party, or whatever it is. And actually, I think if you looked at the member base of the party, I think Labour would actually be further down in the bottom left, really, actually. The membership of the party is pretty radical in comparison to the actual PLP. When you look at how overwhelmingly Jeremy Corbyn was elected, for example, as leader of the party, and what they consistently vote upon, for example, at party conferences, they are very left-wing in comparison to where most people would place them. It's just, actual policy prescriptions being put forward by the leadership do not match the membership in the slightest, unlike the Tories, who consistently go along with exactly what their membership wants, or at least did until Liz Truss crashed the fucking economy.
Although the government will be formed by either Labour or the Conservatives, we do not have a two-party system. In terms of the British parties who will win some representation in Westminster, the distribution of parties on this compass looks like this. Note a couple of things. I'm only putting on...
How does he has SNP to the right of Labour? I mean, I guess if he's doing it based upon their member base, again, you know, if they're putting on member base, maybe they slightly to the right. But actually, I think the SNP are way more liberal. If we're going to go by Polcom standard, I think SNP are more liberal than Labour at this point.
On parties who win seats in Westminster,
like, especially if we look on the traditional Labour voter base, like the traditional Union base, are actually pretty conservative in their pretty conservative in their social opinions, but have mellowed out over time as things have become more accepted and we've progressed and people have been more progressive as a society. SNP used to be very a conservative party, but you know, Scotland has moved very progressive in recent times. I stopped watching for a while ago because he's anti-Scottish independence and used the same bullshit arguments that the Tories, Labour, as the Lib Dems, plus he backs Starmer. I mean, you know, if he wants to be anti-Scottish independence, I can understand why. But the fundamental position that you have to hold is Scottish self-determination, right? If they want to leave, they should be able to leave. And if Phil doesn't agree with that, then, you know, there's no fucking saving him. But I don't know whether he believes that or not, so I'm not going to comment. But yeah, nowadays, I would say SNP are more liberal socially than the Labour Party is currently. But again, there's a difference that we have between the PLP, the leadership, and the member base. But I think the SNP are one of the few parties in Westminster, and obviously in Holyrood as well, where the member base and the actual people who are the MSPs and MPs and the leadership themselves all generally, I mean, at time of recording, obviously we'll see who wins the leadership contest. At time of recording, have similar points of views and similar opinions on these kind of things. Obviously, that might change if fucking Kate Forbes becomes leader, but
there are other parties who have a material impact on which of these mainstream parties will win those seats, but I don't need to unnecessarily complicate things here. And also bear in mind, this is not quantitatively placed. Don't bend my ear about, oh, this party should be further this way or that. Each party moves around their various quadrants from election to election anyway, because they will...
Right, well, he's correct in that. But the problem is that one thing is wrong about there is that they don't move within their quadrant. Labour Party's fucking here. It's fucking here right now. It's in the top right. Name me a left-wing policy prescription they have. Name me a socially liberal policy prescription that they have. You can't do it. They don't fucking exist, right? Oh, they've got cheap energy. Wants to make a publicly owned energy company. Nonsense. It's a slush fund to invest in the private sector. It's just neoliberal fucking new state handouts for the private sector yet again. That's not a left-wing policy prescription.
Will change their manifesto according to various circumstances. I'm just placing them in the quadrants where they sit most happily with their core values and majority of supporters.
So it's based on support. Okay, fair enough. Reasonable. This is absolutely a reasonable place to put them based upon the supporters that they have. Okay, in which case, I take it all back, Phil. I'll take it all back. But I did make that caveat when I was criticising, theoretically.
Is a qualitative graphical illustration. So the first problem for Labour is that the Conservatives have completely free rein on the authoritarian side of the compass amongst those parties, and almost complete free rein on the right wing. The Liberal Democrats straddle left and right, so some centre-right voters will of course vote Liberal Democrat. Also, when competence is an issue, as it is now, you will get people on the centre-right voting for other parties as well, including Labour, as being preferable to an incompetent...
Yeah, the centre-right will vote for Labour because they're a centre-right party from as far as the leadership are concerned. As far as their policies are concerned that they're putting out at the moment, they are just a centre-right party. It doesn't matter if their supporter base is left-wing, if every single policy prescription that they have is right-wing.
Right-wing government, better competent centre-left, even for centre-right voters. This is why business groups are much more positive about Labour these days. It's because they see the Conservatives as having no plan for businesses at all. But in general terms, when all of the parties are applying intelligent strategy, the Conservatives have little competition for right-wing votes and no competition at all for authoritarian votes. Or at least that was the case before the Brexit Party and now Reform UK. But, forget about those for now. Labour, on the other hand, have literally every non-Tory party vying for the votes in their happy place. So now let's consider voters in the top left, because these are crucial. They are left-leaning. They want well-funded, free at point of access health and social care. They want good quality state-provided education for their kids. Where essential services are privatised, they at least want them to be regulated so that they are good quality without being unaffordable. They tend to be people on low to modest incomes, so household budgets can be tight. So this element of their politics attracts them to Labour. However, they also think that immigration's too high, and they think that criminal justice should have a strong emphasis on punishment. Whereas those of us in the bottom half think the emphasis should be on increasing equality of opportunity to reduce the level of criminal behaviour, and then when someone is convicted of a crime, put the focus on rehabilitation to avoid reoffending.
I can see where this is going. These people all vote Labour. These people just vote Labour, right? If they're poor, right, and that's what you're putting into this quadrant, because they're poor, they already vote Labour, right? They already vote Labour. I showed the graphics earlier about the previous elections, right? If they're in this particular social, economic category, they fucking vote Labour. People that Labour are actually chasing here is not poor people who can't put food on the tables, but actually have this particular view about crime and punishment, and also about immigration. No, the people that they're chasing are old people. It's pensioners. Pensioners are the ones that they're chasing at the moment, or who don't work, and are also statistically far richer than the fucking rest of us. It's pensioners that they're chasing.
I mean, I'll tell you where traditional authoritarian attitudes fall down for me. So, someone above the x-axis wants people who commit crimes to face a tough sentence in prison, right? But then their skills are missing from the economy. So, if you want lengthy prison sentences instead of effective ones, where people are released earlier but with lower chance of reoffending because you focus on rehabilitation, then how do you compensate for the loss to the economy because their skills are now missing from the economy? Well, you need more workers then to compensate, don't you? Because you've got a load of people in prison. And
this is some real roundabout ways to say that, the Labour are losing votes to the Tories because they don't advocate for longer enough prison sentences. I would be very happy to cede the idea that Labour are, having a specific point of view on immigration to try and win these views, because immigration is a big issue, especially when it's being made a big issue by the fact that Labour keep following the Conservative narrative on this. Again, we fall into the same pitfalls of following the narrative versus creating the narrative. And Labour are pathetic at creating narratives, and they just continue following the Conservative ones. Not just on the stop the boat stuff, where they've accepted that framing wholesale, right? Not just on the growth stuff, where they've already swallowed that stuff wholesale as well. When was anybody from Labour talking about the anemic economic growth of the UK before Liz Truss started talking about the anti-growth coalition? They didn't talk about it at all. Despite the fact that in 2017 and 2019, they proposed pro-growth manifestos, both times, right? And Mariana Mazzucato did a really good discussion of the manifestos in The Guardian, for example, and talking about the issue that we have with growth being led by private sector debt rather than public investment, etc., etc. And it was very clear that the public investment from 2017-2019 manifestos was pro-growth, right? Maybe it's right that Labour didn't talk about growth enough at that point, and they should have led the narrative on it. But the fact that Labour are so bad at narrativizing at the moment that they just waited for the Tories to go, we are the pro-growth one. They go, oh, no, me, actually, it's me, I'm the pro-growth one. Don't listen to them, we're the pro-growth one. We're also the anti-immigrant ones as well. Hello, whatever the Tories say, we'll be better at it, rather than taking a narrative and running with it. And trying to create a narrative, for example, which is what Corbyn did in 2017. And that's why we saw a massive increase in the vote because of it. I share apparently a huge amount of my viewer base with this guy. When I did a criticism video of him that I posted last week, whatever it was, I got loads of new subscribers and also lost a load of subscribers. It's very clear from the comments that I got on my response to him last week that a bunch of people in his audience are also turned off him by his opinions on Jeremy Corbyn and his fucking shit lib takes. Because his criticisms that he makes of the right are good, but he just refuses to critique anybody he sees as being on the left, despite the fact that Starmer is not on the fucking left. Phil's the type of person to always push primarily utilitarian arguments while poo-pooing any appeal to emotion. While I agree that over-reliance on emotion is bad, it comes across as half-hearted. I mean, it does, but I also apply utilitarian arguments as well. It's just I disagree what counts as positive utility than what Phil does, because he fundamentally is closed-minded as to how electoral calculus should work. Again, the discussion around narrativizing versus following the narrative is exactly where a lot of these liberals fall down, because they refuse to see that narrativizing should be something that people should do.
The longer you want them to stay in prison, the more prisons you...
And again, you see the conservative narrativizing working. We're now only discussing stop the boats because they created a narrative. We're now only discussing economic growth because they created a narrative. And Labour, what narrative are Labour creating? Nothing. And fundamentally in 2017, the narrative was, there is a problem with the division of wealth in this country. There is a problem with the division of labour in this country. There is a problem with the fundamental discrepancies between the regular people and the elites in this country. And it was a narrative that people bought into, right? They probably shouldn't have run in the 2019 election. They should have a different Brexit policy, for example. But they should absolutely have continued pushing this narrative, as it captured the imaginations of voters. And now the current Labour Party are killing that narrative because it's bad for the people who they want to donate to the party. You look at Gary Stevenson, what we watched earlier about, this fundamental economy that only favours rich people. That is the narrative that we need to be pushing, right? Where the 700 billion pounds? Where is it? Where's the 700 billion pounds? We need it back, right? Labour needs to be pushing this narrative, but they're not doing it. They need to push a pro-worker narrative, pro-nurses, right? A super majority of people in this country support the nurses in their strike action, and the Labour aren't supporting them. They aren't just being full-throated in support. It's pathetic. Brexit wasn't even a narrativization that the Conservatives did. Brexit was a narrative pushed by UKIP, right? UKIP is what created the narrative, right? UKIP created that narrative and allowed it to change the face of British politics forever, right? And that was a far-right campaign to do that from UKIP. But it was successful because they used every power at their disposal. The left should be doing that too. I mean, that's what I try and do with my channel, right? Why do you think I'm posting TikToks, talk about landlords and shit? Because, fundamentally I want to change people's minds on landlords. COVID was a huge transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich and nobody talks about it. Same with the global financial crisis and the austerity period. During the austerity period, we continued to increase our public debt and we did loads of quantitative easing and all went in the pockets of fucking rich people. Rich people got off scot-free and got richer over and over time, right? It was a fundamental failure of neoliberal economics.
So you need to come up with a strategy for Labour to win the election. We've already discussed the first problem, which is that their happy place is a very crowded quadrant. Yes, decent number of voters there, but...
Right, so your plan is to hemorrhage votes to the other left-wing parties by moving to the right. I'm not saying you have to stay, the furthest left as possible and entirely craft your manifesto based on the whims of the membership base, right? I'm not even saying that. What I'm saying is don't become an entirely fucking neoliberal party. Is that too much to ask? Jesus.
So many parties splitting the vote. The Conservatives are on their own in the top right. But there's another 3 problems, and all of them centre around that group on the top left. The first is that those people are attracted to Labour for economic policies, but the Conservatives for social justice policies. So if you've got someone in that quadrant and they want to vote for either Labour or the Conservatives because they want to use their vote to determine who funds the next government, they have to decide what's more important, their economic views or their social justice views. Now, given that Labour are already behind with their main quadrant filled with rivals, they cannot really afford to fall behind in this one either, and there are millions of voters in that top left. Second problem is that the Conservatives don't just sit and hope for an even distribution of votes from their adjacent quadrants. They actively appeal to the others. Dishonestly, but actively. You know the sort of thing.
Thing is, Kath, they won't. Predominantly when he talked about lower income people, they absolutely do not choose racism. They choose economic justice. They vote Labour, right? They do vote Labour, these people in this quadrant, the vast majority of the time. But this quadrant is just gigantic because it's full of boomer pensioners, essentially. I think he's fundamentally misaligning a lot of people when he's looking at the demographics of this country. And even then, right? Maybe you could there would probably be even bigger case for this if it was 2 years ago, right? Right, so if we're still in the wake of Brexit, and maybe there's a much bigger argument for saying that Labour should have gone further right on social policy, for example, in 2019, for example. But now, in the wake of huge amounts of strike, public backing for the strike, a cost of living crisis, people looking at the bills of oil companies shooting through the roof, the scope to create a narrative about the rich versus the poor, which people are tapping into at the moment, now is the absolute worst time to try and win people over on social policy rather than economic policy. People are desperate for good economic policy right now. It's a cost of living crisis. What the fuck do you think we should be doing? And again, because they refuse to narrativize, they refuse to upset the CBI, they refuse to upset the bourgeois, they refuse to upset the rich and powerful in this country. They've capitulated entirely to capital and the bourgeois, right? And so the only option is to go right on social policy. That's it. That's all they can do.
For the top left, they'll promise 40 new hospitals, 350 million quid a week to the NHS, more doctors, weekend GP surgeries, more teachers. They haven't delivered any of it. They didn't intend to deliver any of it, but they promise it.
And that's the thing, right? Is Phil is correct here. Why did they promise more hospitals? Why did they promise more teachers? Why did they promise more public spending? Because they were being attacked from the left by the Labour Party. The Labour Party shifted the Overton window in 2017 and 2019, right? They had to abandon austerity as a political platform because it was no longer viable because they knew they would lose to Jeremy Corbyn. And that's why they promised it in were they promising that in 2017? Of course they fucking weren't. The 40 new hospitals, whatever it was, that's a Boris Johnson era policy. The most kind of economically left-wing leader that they've had in God knows how long. Not since Ted Heath. So, this idea that you can just follow the narrative forever, all that will lead to is having both parties going further right wing and leaving us with a continual right wing government. This is not the way you win. Maybe it might be a way to win one election, but it's not a way to win over a population.
And they keep promising it. So now those on the top left think that the Conservatives tick both of their boxes. Well, they're promising, better housing, more teachers, more doctors, more hospitals, more money for the NHS. And they are against immigration and in favour of tougher sentences for criminals. Tick all the boxes. It's really impossible to consider these facts and believe that Labour can possibly win with a strategy that focuses their offer exclusively in that bottom left quadrant.
No one's saying that. The problem is that literally everything they're doing is for the top right quadrant at the moment. They're a neoliberal party. They're a fucking neoliberal party at the moment, Phil. What the fuck are you talking about? This idea that, they're just throwing scraps to the authoritarians when they've just become the Conservative Party on the right wing. Like, they're literally fucking here, if not here.
Yes, the vast majority of their policies will be there. Also, bear in mind, for many of
none of the policies are there. Name me a single policy outside of getting rid of the non-dom exception, for example, is anywhere other than the top right quadrant. Name me one policy.
the voters in that bottom left, it's not enough simply to be in the bottom left for Labour. Because there are some people who'll go, I need Labour to be in this.
Exactly. Actually, you're, in YouTube chat, you're 100% correct. The thing that disproves all of this is Scotland. In that Scotland abandoned Labour because they were too neoliberal. They abandoned them because they were too right-wing, right? And they joined the SNP. Because the SNP decided that the neoliberal era of Blair garbage that Starmer and Reeves clearly want to, tap into, that is what lost Scotland. Ed Miliband and Gordon Brown lost Scotland. The only Labour leader to have gained seats in Scotland is fucking Jeremy Corbyn. Well, independence was essentially down to the fact that Scotland got screwed over by neoliberal economics.
Specific part of this quadrant, because that's where I am, and I will vote for a party that's there. To which Labour go, okay, all right, so we do that, we get your vote, but then we lose all these people over here because they're saying, well, no, you should be in this part of the quadrant. So Labour can't possibly garner even the vast majority of those votes anyway. So, but their core values are in that bottom left. So, of course, the vast majority of their policies will be there.
The core value of the membership and the voters, yes, but not the PLP.
But impossible to win an election with those alone. The vote is split too many ways. There are too many people who will make great the enemy of the good. And the Conservatives are making offers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, is that he thinks that neoliberalism is good, right? When I make criticisms of the Labour Party, it's because they will make the country worse. They'll make the country worse slower than the Tories will. I don't doubt that for a second, right? If the Conservatives are on course to destroy the country from the inside, the Labour will give us slow decline. But unfortunately, neither of these things are good enough, right? I am not somebody who thinks that everything should be perfect. I am not the person who thinks that perfect should be the enemy of good. I fundamentally disagree with that. But, there's a point. There's a limit. There's a limit to which, I will accept a bad Labour Party. And it's gone way past that limit. Like months ago, they went past that limit, for example. When you fundamentally have a country that is failing because of lack of public investment, and you have a Labour Party who say, we're not going to be spending money on public investment, for example, then you're fucked. We're fucked. Until Labour admits we will have to run a budget deficit, they are lying, because they will have to, and it will need to happen to be able to reinvigorate this country through public investment. Like that's the long and short of it. And until they admit that, they're going to fail miserably. And after 5 years of Labour government, we'll have our own version of Chega or whatever.
Outside of their own core values, even though they have no intention of delivering on them. So Labour have
Again, so you're just saying, well, we should lie to the population then. Brilliant, love it.
to make some offers to those in the top left. It doesn't sit right with many of us, but the only alternative is accepting Conservative rule.
So I think the problem with this video is broadly, right? Broadly, a lot of what he's saying here has a lot of basis in some amount of fact, right? I think there is some amount of fact to what he's saying here, and I think that's reasonable. But the problem is one of the premises that he has here, is that Labour are just throwing scraps to these people, which is fundamentally not true. The entire policy platform, basically all of it, bar none, is here. It's neoliberal, it's right-wing neoliberalism. To say that what they're doing is some just minor divergence away from a core left-wing value perspective is nonsense, because that's not where any of the policies that they've proposed are. It's all right-wing. None of it is left-wing. And that's the fundamental problem with this issue. What I reckon about a pure reliance on a super-rationalist presentation of a leftist case is that we live in a right-wing neoliberal status quo, which makes it easier for the Tories to gaslight people. You need an emotional engagement with the state of the world to fight back against that. Well, yeah, I do agree with that. There needs to be some amount of, narrativizing around that. I would definitely agree. I definitely agree with that. The Blairites are fanatically convinced neoliberalism won't win it for them, and they're so wrong, they made a whole generation think it doesn't make a difference who you vote for. That's true. The amount of people who hate Labour, nothing to do with Corbyn, nothing to do with Miliband, nothing to do with Starmer, they still hate Labour because of Blair, and say never Labour ever again. In the same way that I would say never again for the Liberal Democrats for 2010 to 2015, right? Those people are essentially a lost cause at this point, because new Labour failed fundamentally changing the economy. And I've mentioned it before. Thatcherism, like Blair's full-throated defence of Thatcherism, Peter Mandelson, we're all Thatcherites now, for example, is a direct result of loads of the crises that we face, right? The financial crisis was the lack of capital controls from the Labour Party in the New Labour era, for example. The housing crisis we have now is directly a result of Labour refusing to reverse right to buy, and also not building any council houses. I will say this fact yet again because it's true. In the few years that Boris Johnson was Prime Minister, more council houses got built than in 10 years of Tony Blair. 10 years, for example. If Keith was any good, Phil wouldn't have to be a fluffer. Yeah, that's true.
Forevermore. That is even less acceptable to me. The Conservatives have killed tens of thousands of people unnecessarily as a direct result of their policies, and plunged many more into poverty under every single.
I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of people if you take austerity as well.
One of their leaders so far. It is a moral imperative that they be stopped. But there's a third problem with this group as well.
I'm literally
See, right now, you can get a
Xtopia97, welcome to the Justice Stream. I hope you're doing okay.
decent number of these people from the top left being attracted to Labour, more attracted to Labour than the Conservatives, not only a result of Tory incompetence on both of their political angles, but with severe public service crisis.
And also, another thing as well is that even if you don't appeal to these people on social policy, if you appeal to them enough on economic policy, they'll move over as well, right? And I think a lot of people did move over in 2017 from that specific group. If you sell them the narrative, the people versus the elites narrative, which people say, oh, you're just rank populism. Yes, I'm a populist. Welcome to the channel. Right? Did you not hear the notification that said I'm literally a communist? Like, the idea that there is a class stratification between the people and the elites in this country is 100% correct, and it is. And it's not just down the bourgeois proletariat distinction, which it should be. Obviously, it should be down that distinction too. But it's also the inner ring, the inner circle of the establishment who went to private school, who went to Oxbridge, who now are a part of our media and political sphere, and who are, buddies with people who own gigantic corporations, right? That is the establishment, that is the elite. We need to destroy these people politically, right? Their political power needs to be removed from them. Otherwise, we cannot fix this country. And reappropriate some of these people's wealth through wealth taxes, for example. If we appeal to these people in this top left quadrant, right? If we take this Polcom stuff as being correct, the Labour can win the election without having to compromise too much on social policy. I'm not saying they don't have to compromise on something; they probably should, but their economic policy is pathetic. That they're actually going to lose these people on how bad they are on the economy.
Crises, their need for Labour to fix those is more likely to override their desire to punish people they don't even know. So their economic views may take precedence over their social justice views.
Okay.
And even under these circumstances, Labour cannot take their votes for granted, because this
because their economic views are shit. Their economic policies are garbage. All of my criticisms of Labour have been on their crappy economic policy, which you're saying we should compromise on to try and win over people who already agree with us on fucking economics. What are you talking about, Phil?
To be quite a disaffected group, but I'll come on to that. So they have to make some offer. But consider what happens later. So Labour form a government on the back of some of these votes. They start to fix public services. People's incomes tends to go ahead of the rate of inflation, just as it does under all Labour governments. After a while, these people start to relax a bit because the problems are being dealt with. They take for granted the much better public services and their standard of living. And they start to put more emphasis on immigration and criminal justice again, which Labour aren't speaking to them about. They start to see the Conservatives as more attractive. At that point, a Labour Party still focused on a strategy of continuing to win will need to make better offers. And if they don't, the Conservatives will win power again, because they will. This is the need for pragmatism in politics, especially in a first-past-the-post system, as we currently have. No other way to win. Yes, it's another argument for proportional representation, but we don't have that. No matter what Labour's private intentions in that direction are, if they have any at all, the next election, at least, and probably the one after, is going to be fought on the first-past-the-post basis. And you tell me there's a way for Labour to win such an election without making offers to people grouped around the centre in the adjoining quadrants. And the voters in the top left are so important because, as I say, they are the disaffected ones. There is no mainstream party which sits in their quadrant. Bottom right, you've got Liberal Democrats. Top right, you've got the Conservatives. Bottom left, you've got basically every other...
True, yeah. The famously libertarian Liberal Democrats. They're just a neoliberal party, right? They're just yet another neoliberal party.
Okay. Bottom left, I meant, sorry. Top left, completely unrepresented by the core values of any party. Now, the Brexit Party, which is now the Reform UK Party, claim to represent them. They talk about economically left-wing policies as well as authoritarian policies aiming to tick both boxes. But the people running the...
What's interesting is actually Reform UK have like an electoral alliance with the Social Democratic Party, who, by Phil's understanding of the Polcom, would sit in this quadrant as well.
The party are actually very right-wing. Nigel Farage, who they keep rolling out as their standard bearer, of course, is on record as saying we should be privatising this, that and the other, including healthcare. The party may promise strong public services. But
Addicted to Mosh, at the start of this video, he literally said that the left-wing economics is when the state does stuff.
They privately talk about the need to privatise everything. So they lie, just like the Tories. They're lying about their economic policies. But their success owes a great deal to recognition.
Reform are to the left of the Conservative Party. I read their plan for the energy market. And they did say that if energy companies couldn't keep their prices low enough, they would get nationalised, right? Now that was a definitive policy, not just like a waft, a general sense of something, right? It was a definitive policy that said we will nationalise you. So that's to the left. That is purportedly to be the left of the Conservatives on this issue specifically.
Recognising that in that top left you have a completely untapped voter base. They don't feel represented by any Westminster party. So plugging the idea of the establishment being against them, really easy for two reasons. First of all, the establishment is against them because most of these people are on low to middle incomes. And of course, they're being taken advantage of. But the second thing is there's no party in Westminster speaks to them. No.
The Labour Party should already be speaking to. It was speaking to them in 2017 and 2019. In fact, Jeremy Corbyn was more restrictive on something like immigration than Ed Miliband was, for example, right? Just because he's pro-refugee or pro-migrant or whatever, or anti-NATO or anti-Western intervention, for example. Even though being pro-NATO was in the manifesto, for example, he was still appealing to them on that issue specifically because Jeremy Corbyn holds the incorrect idea that increased immigration depresses the wages of native workers, which it doesn't.
party in Westminster which is left-wing authoritarian, because that is North Korea, and who wants to be North Korea? Not even North Korea. So their votes are up for grabs. They're crucial to winning power, but those votes need to be won amongst a voter base that is suspicious of Westminster parties. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me...
True. The obvious answer to this is to position yourself as not the mainstream. Position yourself as a populist, which is what we should have been doing. And instead, we've got Keir Starmer swanning over to speak to fucking executives at Davos, taking money from MPM Connect and proposing continuity neoliberalism. Like, the thing is, he's so close to a point and then just veers off it and says, well, actually, Starmer's fine because he said crime was bad. Rather than, the entirety of his macroeconomic policy being out of step with the entirety of the left. Half of this diagram here. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Anyway, please like and subscribe. Ring the bell. Become a member on YouTube for 99p for YouTube viewers. And if you ring the bell, you'll notify when I go live too. And that's the end of the segment. Segment over.